The dust that rose behind Silas Boone's boots seemed reluctant to settle, like the ghosts that trailed him. Late afternoon sun bled across the streets of Dry Creek, turning every board and bootprint gold, but it didn't warm him. His tan duster hung heavy on his shoulders, frayed at the cuffs, stiff with years of sun and sweat. He rode in slow, saddle creaking beneath him, head low beneath a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed the hollows of a face shaped by silence. He wasn't here to make noise. Silas passed the saloon without a glance, though eyes followed him through its dusty windows. Townsfolk paused in their chores, nodded without smiling. They remembered his brother, Boone the Younger, quick with a tune and quicker to die. Silas had no charm left to spend. He just needed a cow, a quiet trade, some rope, and a long ride home. He tied his horse to a crooked post outside the feed store and stepped onto the warped porch boards. The sun pressed down like judgment, but the silence pressed harder. He turned toward the corral instead. That's when he heard it, a strange stillness beneath the usual murmur of wind and hooves. A child's voice. "I think it's today. Mama said not to cry, but I think today's her last day." Silas slowed, boot heels clicking on hard-packed earth. He followed the voice past the horse pens to a wooden fence where a few townsfolk stood clustered, not helping, just watching. And there she was. A woman sitting in the dirt, her back against the fence post, wrists bound tight with thick rope. Her emerald dress was torn at the hem, dirt smudged along the sleeves. Long dark hair fell loose over her shoulder, tangled and wet. She didn't beg, didn't flinch, just stared out across the open fields like she wasn't there at all. The girl beside her couldn't have been more than 7. Barefoot, soft lavender dress, curls sticking to her cheeks. She clutched her mother's fingers the way a drowning soul might cling to a plank. Silas stopped 5 paces away. "What's this?" he asked, voice low. An old man, Jacob Sims, the butcher, turned. Says she tried to steal from the banker. Claims she didn't know it was a crime to sew from borrowed cloth. "A dressmaker?" Silas asked. "Used to be," Sims muttered. "Now she's just another debt to settle." No trial. No words. Just rope and shame, handed down by men who never made room for explanations. The girl looked up at Silas with wide, dry eyes. She stepped forward without fear, reached up and took his rough hand like she'd known him all her short life. He froze. "She's not bad," the girl whispered. "She was just hungry. And she said not to tell anyone, but it's her last day alive." Silas stared at the child. Not a tear in her eye. He looked at the woman again. Evelyn May, he remembered now. He'd seen her once years ago, singing in the church choir, her voice steady, eyes proud. That was before the town turned cold. "Sheriff say that?" he asked, jaw tight. "Sheriff don't need to," said Sims. "Sunset's punishment enough." Silas pulled his hand free gently, stepped back. The girl didn't follow. She returned to her mother, sat cross-legged beside her in the dust, and laid her head in her lap. Evelyn finally looked up. Her eyes met Silas's for the briefest moment, startled, defiant, exhausted. She looked away. He should have walked on. Should have turned back to the cow pens, done the trade, rode out before dusk. But the girl's whisper clung to his coat like smoke. He made it halfway to the livery before his feet stopped. There, in the still heat of afternoon, a memory gripped him. His own mother, lips blue, tied to her sickbed while church elders whispered outside the door. Too far gone, they said. Nothing to be done. He'd sat beside her in silence, 16 and scared, unable to untie what men with words had fastened. That same silence sat here now. And it stank. He spun on his heel and marched toward the sheriff's office. Sheriff Jeb Danner sat with his boots on the desk and a toothpick in his teeth. The man was as swollen with self-importance as the badge on his chest. "She steal?" Silas asked, voice flat. "She defrauded a banker," Danner replied, not looking up. "Took advance payment, didn't deliver." "She run?" "Nope. Sat right there when they came for her. Said she had nothing else." Silas pulled a small leather pouch from his coat and dropped it on the desk with a thud. Silver coins clinked together. "Buy her out." Danner raised an eyebrow. "She owes more." Silas took a breath, removed his hat, and placed a folded paper beside the coins. His horse's deed. Danner grinned. "Boone, you serious?" "Deadly." "She ain't yours. She's a person." Silence spread like blood in water. Danner leaned back, hands laced behind his head. "Take her. But she ain't Dry Creek's problem after this." Silas turned without another word. Back of the fence, the girl looked up as he approached, hope flickering beneath the weight of her small shoulders. Silas crouched beside her. "You ready to go?" Evelyn's voice cracked for the first time. "You don't know what you're doing." "Maybe not," he said. "But I know what happens if I don't." He sliced the rope with his knife. It fell like a snake to the dirt. He stood and offered her a hand. Evelyn looked at it, then at him. She took it, not because she trusted him, but because no one else had ever offered one. And as the sun dipped lower behind the hills, casting their 3 shadows long across the dry earth, Silas knew one thing for sure: he hadn't come for a cow. But maybe, just maybe, he'd found a reason to stay. The storm rolled in slow, the way all things crept in Dry Creek, quiet, deliberate, and with a touch of menace. Silas led the 2 of them, mother and child, along the narrow cattle trail that skirted behind the churchyard and vanished into the canyon shadows. The girl, Lottie, held his fingers loosely, her tiny steps keeping pace without complaint. Evelyn stumbled once, caught herself, but said nothing. The rain began in thin needles, soft at first, then sharper, soaking into the seams of Silas's coat. They didn't speak until the lights of town were no longer visible behind them. "Why did you do it?" Evelyn's voice was hoarse, not from weeping, but from holding everything in. Silas didn't turn. "I reckon I've let too many things go quiet." She exhaled, not quite a laugh, not quite anything. "You know they'll talk," she said. "They'll say you're a fool." He shrugged beneath the dripping weight of his coat. "Been called worse." By the time they reached the outer edge of Silas's ranch, just a cluster of weather-beaten outbuildings wrapped in wire fence, the sky had turned dark as spilled ink. Lightning flashed once, illuminating the barn ahead like a ghost story. Inside it was dry and musty, sweet with old hay and saddle oil. Silas struck a match and lit the hanging lantern. Its glow threw golden shadows across the wood slats. "You'll be safe here," he said, gesturing toward the bed of hay near the far wall. "Not much, but dry." Lottie ran toward it, spun once like a colt, and dropped to her knees, burying her face into the hay with a sleepy sigh. Evelyn lingered near the doorway. Her dress clung to her skin, torn fabric heavy with rain. She wrapped her arms around herself, unsure what to do with her body now that was no longer bound. "There's clean water in that barrel," Silas said. "Towels on the peg. Blanket, too." She nodded once, eyes never quite meeting his. She moved like someone who'd forgotten how to be alone in a room, like she half expected a rope to fall from the rafters. Silas turned his back, tended to the fire he'd built in the rusted iron stove at the barn's center. He could hear the water sloshing as she washed, hear the breath she let out when the blanket touched her skin. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For not asking what I did. Or why." He poured coffee from a dented tin pot into 2 cups, handed her one. Their fingers touched. Brief, but enough. "I don't care about the why," he said. "Only that a girl shouldn't have to bury her mother by sundown." She stared at the cup, steam rising between them. "They called me a liar. A thief. Said I took more than I gave. Maybe I did. I don't even know anymore." Silas leaned against the wall, staring into the flickering lantern. "Folks in Dry Creek don't care much for the full story. Only the ending." "What about you?" she asked. He looked up. "I'm just trying to write a better one." Lottie stirred, rolled over in her sleep, mumbling softly. Evelyn's eyes softened at the sound. She walked over, pulled the blanket tighter around her daughter's shoulders, then sat beside her, tucking her own legs beneath the blanket. "You ever lose something so deep it stopped hurting?" she asked, voice barely audible. Silas took a long breath. "Yeah. My brother. Buried him on the ridge. After that, it was like I forgot what it felt like to feel anything at all." Evelyn nodded slowly. "Me too. I lost myself somewhere between the sewing needle and the banker's door." Neither spoke for a while. The storm passed. The rain softened into a whisper. Silence returned, not cruel this time, but companionable. Outside, the land smelled clean, scrubbed of its dust and sin. At first light, the barn cracked open to a pale wash of dawn. Silas stepped outside, letting the cool wind hit his face. The world felt different, not changed, but waiting. Behind him, he heard movement. He turned. Evelyn stood in the doorway, wrapped in his blanket, her hair damp but brushed. In the rising light, her green eyes looked brighter than they had any right to. "I can clean," she said simply. "Mend tack. Cook." You don't owe me anything, Silas replied. I know, she said, but I'd rather be useful than grateful. Lottie stepped up beside her, holding an old broom twice her size. We can help, she said proudly. Silas chuckled. All right then, let's start with the chickens. As they walked toward the coop, something like peace settled in his chest, not the loud kind, not triumphant, just quiet and earned. They didn't speak much that morning. Evelyn moved with purpose, Lottie ran in circles, and Silas watched them like a man waking from a long, cold dream. Later, as the sun rose higher, he leaned against the porch rail and looked out over the hills. The world still held its shadows, but maybe, just maybe, it also held the possibility of light. Funny, he thought, how everything had changed because a child whispered the truth into the right ears. And somewhere deep inside, where old wounds never fully healed, Silas Boone felt the faint thrum of something stubborn and dangerous. Hope.